Welcome to Geek Philosophy, where we love geeky wisdom. If you're new to the channel, my name's Brian. Now, we usually talk about Dungeons and Dragons and tabletop RPGs and Dungeon Master advice and so on, but today I want to do something a bit different. If you follow the channel for a while, you may know a little bit about my background, but with the new Daredevil Born Again series coming out, I wanted to take a moment and reflect on how some of my interests took shape. Specifically, how my love for comics, martial arts, and D&D all shaped who I am in some way, shape, or form. Because believe it or not, there was a time when superheroes weren't always as popular as they are now, and practicing martial arts was definitely not as common as it is these days, at least in the mainstream culture, and D&D was way outside of that mainstream. But I was into all of those things from a pretty young age. I saw them all as different ways to have fun, first and foremost, but also how to push myself and explore new ideas. Looking back, they weren't just hobbies, but they were experiences that helped me grow. And they all tie back to about the same time. I was around 7 years old when I watched The Karate Kid and I was hooked. I knew I had to learn martial arts. And luckily for me, my parents signed me up for classes. And there was something about the discipline and the skill of it that just drew me in. And I wasn't just learning about self-defense or learning how to fight. It was about learning confidence and self-control and being able to be comfortable in myself, both physically and mentally. And it gave me a glimpse into other cultures and learning about different things. Now, not that long after, I discovered comic books, specifically a Daredevil comic book. And he was different. He wasn't like the big superheroes with the flashy powers. He was a fighter and a strategist. And he had these heightened senses that gave him an edge, but his real power came from his training, his resilience, and his ability to stand up for other people. Daredevil stood out to me because he wasn't the strongest or the fastest, but he never backed down. The stories were incredible, and the art was amazing, and all of the things that you would like in a comic book as a young kid. The stereotype is that people like comic book superheroes for the fantasy, the flashy costumes, and the incredible powers, and the epic battles between the good guys and the bad guys. And all that stuff is true. Let's be honest, that's what draws people in, and it's a lot of fun. But for those of us that stuck with it and know the genre, know that there's a lot more to it than that. Well-crafted comics are about storytelling and character development. They can be allegorical and they explore the human condition, and in some ways, they're like modern Greek tragedies. Stories of flawed people who struggle and fall and fail and rise back again despite all the odds. And Daredevil embodied all of that. He wasn't just someone who fought against the injustice as a superhero. He lived in the hardship and the pain and the loss, and yet he kept going. Now, I'm a big fan of the Man Without Fear miniseries. It's a great retelling of his origin. It came out years after the character was created, but it strips down Daredevil to his core, and it shows the struggles, the losses, and the defining moments that shape him into a defender of others. And it's not just about the accident that took his sight and heightened the rest of his senses, it's about the pain and the discipline and the choices that turn Matt Murdock into a hero. Yes, he's known as the Man Without Fear, but it's not because he didn't ever have fear and he doesn't get scared. It's because he worked to overcome it. And that really stuck with me. The idea of facing challenges and overcoming them is also a big part of another hobby that I had when I was growing up, D&D. Around the same time I started collecting Daredevil, I got into Dungeons and Dragons, and I played AD&D first edition in 6th grade and 7th grade while I was living in base housing on a Navy base. And I had a friend that I went to school with that told me about the game, and I went to my friend Frank's house and played with his stepdad, who was our DM, and his sister, and it was my real introduction into the game. So when I moved to a new state and a new school, in 8th grade, I picked up 2nd edition. It had just come out recently, and I started running my own games for my new friends. But when you found other players, it was like discovering a whole hidden world, because you guys could talk about it and you would figure out who liked what and what characters you like to play and what characters they'd played in the past. Everybody likes to talk about their character and what they do in the game. And so since then, D&D has been a part of my life in a lot of different ways, and it shaped how I think about things around the game table and beyond. Even just storytelling and world building and running games has helped me in just my normal life, the same way that the martial arts did. So I was able to adjust and think about things in a different perspective than I would have normally had I not encountered these things. This isn't new. If you grow up playing sports, you have a different perspective because of what you learn through playing sports. If you grow up as an artist, you have a different perspective because of the art that you make. Or music. If you're a musician, you have a different perspective there. This list goes on, but these things weren't as popular as music and playing sports and some of those other things. So it was interesting for me because while I had all different groups of people and I spent time with people who shared my love for philosophy and storytelling and creating and activity, there wasn't a whole lot of overlap with those groups. I have one friend that was in all of those groups. You've seen him on the channel, Carrie. So thank you, Carrie. But thank you all of you who were friends of mine throughout the years in all of those different areas. You helped me become who I am today because this isn't a solitary endeavor. Comics can be if you just read them on your own, but it's much better to be able to talk about them with people after. When you practice martial arts, you need a partner to practice with. It's not a solitary endeavor, and definitely gaming isn't either. So I really have to give it up to all the people who took the time to play with me, teach me things, and train with me over the years as I developed into who I am now. But I have to say, even for comic book fans at the time, Daredevil felt like a hidden gem. It was something that only a few of us, at least in the group of people that I was hanging with at the time, appreciated. Because not everybody was collecting Daredevil. A lot of people were collecting all the new X-Men comic books or the Image comic books that were just launching, and it felt like Daredevil was sort of the old-fashioned thing to collect because he'd been out forever, but not to me. And so it was sort of like this diamond in the rough. Like you saw something that other people weren't seeing at the time. And I think that was part of the appeal to me as well. Now, I have to say that there was a Daredevil movie released in the early 2000s. Actually, even before that in the 80s, there was a Daredevil character that showed up on The Incredible Hulk. But in the 2000s, the early 2000s, when that Daredevil movie came out, it wasn't the best, but I was still excited because my favorite superhero comic book character was on the big screen. But it was about 10 years ago now that the Daredevil Netflix series came out. Right around my birthday at the time, ironically, and it felt like the best possible birthday gift. And that weekend was actually my first convention that I ever went to. I went to MegaCon in Orlando, Florida, and it was an unforgettable experience because I got to meet Lee Weeks, one of my favorite Daredevil artists of all time, the one that was penciling the book at the time I was collecting. And talking with him and sharing that passion and seeing Daredevil finally getting the recognition he deserved made it one of the most memorable experiences that I've ever had, especially at a convention. He signed a poster for me, and it's been hanging on my wall ever since. And after attending that first convention, I realized that a bunch of people were cosplaying as their favorite characters. So the next time I went, I cosplayed as not only Daredevil, but his mentor, Stick. Now, here we are, 10 years later, and Daredevil Born Again is coming out. And it blows my mind that of all of those things that used to be considered niche and were a little bit weird or maybe nerdy at that time are a huge deal today. Comic book movies are the biggest blockbusters in the world. Martial arts schools are everywhere. You can find martial arts schools in almost every city, town, even small town. They've got a jiu-jitsu school somewhere that you can probably find and start training in. And there's people that are making a living in combat sports. It's crazy. This was not as big of a deal back then. And as you all know from following this channel, D&D is more popular than ever. There are actual play shows and celebrity D&D games and even YouTube channels like this one. Well, let's face it, most of them much bigger than this one, but you get my point. The fact that people are even making and watching YouTube videos like this is crazy to me. Now, I said before, Daredevil is called the man without fear. And while we may not all be vigilantes out there fighting crime, and please don't do that, we can still learn something from that. We shouldn't be afraid to embrace the things that we love, whether it's comics, martial arts, or D&D, no matter what you are into. If it's not on my list, if it's on your list, don't worry about it. You shouldn't be afraid of that. Love it because you love it. Being passionate about something isn't a weakness. It's what makes us who we are. So thanks for sticking with me as I ramble on a little bit about what made me who I am and why I end up doing things like this channel. And I'll leave you with a little bit of geek philosophy from Daredevil's mentor, Stick. Just sit back and take this in. You might learn something. Cheers.